Hey everyone, my name is Sean and today we're going to be looking at another deck profile for Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy of the Duelist Link Evolution. As it is the Halloween season, today we're going to be doing Camula's Vampire deck. Another classic character from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX who I absolutely love. Enjoy the theme music in the background and let's get to the deck profile. And happy Halloween to you all, however you are choosing to spend your weekend. So, we're doing Halloween based decks or similar to Halloween themed decks throughout the week. Yesterday I did Evil Eye, and today we're doing something a more fun deck, more just meme deck, and that will be your vampires. I'm not going to do a whole massive breakdown as I normally would here because there isn't a lot of depth to this deck. It's vampires and they do a little bit of stuff that's cool, but you know, there's nothing competitive about this deck nonetheless. So let's go to the profile. First of all, I'm playing 3 copies of Vampire Familiar. This and Vampire Retainer are your main starters for the deck. What you want to do with these cards is get them to the graveyard as soon as you can, and then by sending another Vampire card from your hand or field to the graveyard, you can summon either of these cards from your graveyard to the field. And then when these cards hit the field, you pay 500 life points, and if you do Retainer, that will let you add 1 Vampire Spell or Trap card from your deck. Or if you do Familiar, that will allow you to add 1 monster from your deck. Fantastic searchers for your deck. You want to see them pretty much every opening hand in every game. And then for most of the vampires here, we're playing cards that can mill cards from your opponent's deck and send cards to the graveyard. So we've got Vampire Lady who can do that, Vampire Duke, Vampire Grace can do that, and Vampire Lord that can do that. So all of these cards have abilities which can send cards from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, and that's going to be relevant later on. Vampire Lady isn't that good, but she's easy to summon, so I thought let me put 1 copy of her in, and we're trying to, you know, do as many different vampires as we can. Vampire Duke is an extender. When he's normal summon, he allows you to revive a vampire monster in your graveyard. And then Vampire Fraulein is probably your best vampire card, and we're playing 3 of her. Whenever a monster attacks, you can summon her to the field in defense position, and then if a zombie monster attacks an opponent's monster, you can pay up to 3,000 life points to increase that monster's attack and defense by that much. So she is great for attacking over monsters and allowing your cards to be over bigger monsters. Also, if she happens to destroy an opponent's monster and by battle, she can then summon it to your field from your opponent's graveyard, and that's going to be relevant a little bit later on for a certain card. Now, something else that can do something like this is also Vampire Scarlet Scourge. And Scarlet Scourge also has the same effect. If he destroys a monster by battle, he can summon it from the opponent's graveyard to your field. But also, when he is summoned, he's an extender like Duke. He can pay 1,000 life points to summon a vampire from your graveyard. Both of these 2 cards, they're relevant in that type of effect that you can take a card from your opponent's field, from your opponent's graveyard to the field. Because when you go to summon out Dampier Vampire Sheridan, if you use a monster with a level that is owned by your opponent for the XC summon of this card, you can treat it as level 6. So it doesn't matter what you take, as long as you take one of your opponent's cards, you can then use it as a level 6 for this summon here. And he's a pretty good boy, this card. This card has the ability to send any card in the graveyard to the from the field to the graveyard by sending, not destroying it. But what's also nice about this card is that if this card sends an opponent's monster from the field to the graveyard or a monster by battle, you can then attach a material to summon it to your field in defense position, so more of your stealing of your opponent's cards. Kind of running with that theme about taking your opponent's cards, we have 3 copies of Crackdown as well. It's nice for this deck. You can steal your opponent's monster, you can do it during another player's turn, and you can use this card for a tribute summon, and we've got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tribute monsters that we can use it to tribute for Crackdown, but then you could also use that monster as a generic monster for a link summon as well. As for your other vampire monsters, there's nothing too noteworthy here. Vampire Lord I just put in because he's the classic OG vampire. And this card actually used to be a meta card a long time ago, back in the day where people still played Raigeki, Mirror Force, Smashing Ground, because Vampire Lord, when he is destroyed by a card effect, he can come back from the graveyard and summon himself. But now that he's only got being a monster with only 2,000 attack, people are just going to attack over this card, and it's not a problem unless you have Fraulein on the board. Vampire Grace, she's also kind of garbage. If a zombie monster is summoned and this card is in your graveyard, you can pay 2,000 life points to bring this back from your graveyard to the field. It's just an extender really as well, and then she can mill a card. And then last of all, we have Vampire Red Baron. He looks really cool. Once per turn, you can pay 1,000 life points to swap control of one of your monsters with one of a vampire monster you control. So that's nice for stealing your opponent's monsters to make Sheridan. And then if this card is destroyed by destroys any monster by battle, you can summon them to your field as well. Generic cards, we have Lure, Foolish, Monster Reborn, 1 for 1, Pot of Extravagance. But for vampire cards, we have Vampire Kingdom at 3. Vampire Kingdom isn't that good, but when a card is sent from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, so that is your what cards can do that? It's going to be Grace, Vampire Lord, Vampire Lady, or Vampire Duke by your own effects. Or if your opponent does an effect that sends a card from their graveyard to the field, from their deck to the graveyard, sorry. Vampire Kingdom can pop a card on the field and Foolish Burial one of your vampires. Also, it gives all your cards 500 attack. Not a really reliable card, but the other reason why we want to play this card is because of this card here, Vampire Takeover. And that is, if you don't have a field spell on the field, you can activate a field spell from your deck, your Vampire Kingdom, and then you can summon a vampire monster from your graveyard. So this is a +1 card, but you must have no field spells activate on the field in order to use this card. But it's a nice card, and it works really well as a revival card, and also Monster Reborn in that way with the card Vampire Sucker. When zombie monster is summoned to the field and Vampire Sucker is on the board, you get to draw 1 card. Now, one thing that is relevant for this matchup that we don't often use with Vampire Sucker, because she's often used in generic zombie decks, is that if you would tribute summon a monster, or a tribute summon of a zombie monster, then you can use one of your opponent's monsters as the material for the tribute summon, as long as it's a zombie monster. Now, making your opponent's monsters zombies isn't really too easy to do in this deck, because we're not playing Zombie World, and you could play Zombie World if you want to take more advantage of Vampire Sucker's effect and the fact that you're playing a lot of tribute monsters. I think there's a lot to set up though. But what she can do is summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard, and that monster becomes a zombie monster, and then you can just use it as a tribute material for your vampire cards as well. And plus you get a draw as well if you do this. Just make sure that the card you choose doesn't benefit your opponent in any way, shape or form, and that you are going to be able to tribute it off. Other cards in the main deck here, we have Vampire Awakening. It summons a vampire from your deck, really easy to do. And then Vampire Domination is your negate for the deck, as long as you have a vampire monster on the field. And if it was a monster that you negated, you get to get that monster's attack in terms of life points. Last card that we need to talk about, 2 cards, is Vampire's Desire. This is Foolish Burial and Monster Reborn all in 1 card for vampires. You can choose a card on your field with a level, send a different vampire from your deck to the graveyard, and then that monster becomes that level, so it can make your monsters into like level 6 or level 5, which is going to be relevant for your rank plays. Or you can use anything to send your vampire familiar or retainer to the graveyard and then bring them back. So it's a nice little extender and a way to modify your levels. But then also it has the effect of target 1 vampire monster in your graveyard, send 1 monster you control to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon that target. Do make sure that whatever you send to the graveyard for this effect, it has to go to the graveyard. So be aware that once you've done Retainer and Familiar's effect to summon them from the graveyard, the next time they leave the field they will be banished. So if you're doing the Monster Reborn effect with Desire, they will be banished, and then you won't be able to summon a monster because a card was not sent to the graveyard, and it says if you do. Then the last card we have here is Vampire Domain. Vampire Domain is a card that gives you an extra normal summon. It allows you to put multiple monsters on the board, and anytime your vampire monster does damage to your opponent, you get that damage back in life points. What's nice about this card is it works really well with Retainer and Vampire Familiar, because if you choose to activate this card's effect, it will linger for the rest of the turn, so you will still get your extra normal summon, and then it's a free card you can just send to the graveyard to summon these cards out of the graveyard. So Vampire's Domain is pretty nice. For your extra deck here, we have a lot of generic cards. I've already talked about what Sucker does, but it's just your usual lineup of generic links, because we want cards to be able to make away with our opponent's cards for Crackdown, and we're doing multiple copies because we're doing Extravagance. But if you want to talk about the nice cards here, we've got Crimson Knight Vampire Braum, 2 level 5 zombie monsters. You can attach 1 material from this card and then summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard to your field, but only that monster can attack for the rest of the turn. Not really a great effect in my opinion, but it's a vampire card, so I'm trying to keep vampires in the deck, and there aren't too many to use. And then the second effect of this is once per turn, if this card was destroyed by an opponent's card and sent to your graveyard, you can summon it back to the field in defense positions. Not really that good, to be honest with you, but vampires. And then last card is Vampire Sheridan. Like I said, it can modify if you've got one of your opponent's monsters and it isn't the correct level, it can be used as long as your opponent originally owned it. And then once per turn, you can detach a material from this card. It sends a card to the graveyard, so it's not it's targeted removal, but it doesn't destroy. And then you can summon a card from your opponent's graveyard to your field. And that is Vampires. So let's go into a video and talk about, let's see how this does in action. Now, I will preface this deck is not good, guys. This is not designed to be competitive, but it's Halloween, so we're having fun with it, you know. I lost a lot with this deck trying to get a decent match, and I had to kind of just settle for whatever I was able to get because I spent so long testing this deck out. I tried it with hand traps, I tried it with more extenders, and afterwards I was like, you know what, there's no way to make this deck actually really good. Let's just have fun with it and play some Vampires. So I did 1-for-1. The target for 1-for-1 is going to be Vampire Familiar. Vampire Familiar is going to get a monster from our deck, so we may as well go into another extender. So we'll go into Retainer. As long as you have a way to put Retainer in the graveyard, that's fine. And then one card we're going to be using a lot for this deck is Link Karibo, because it pops the Familiar into the graveyard. Then we could use Familiar's effect later on to revive it, but you won't get another search, which is a little bit unfortunate. I wish it was abusable in that way. So we're going to do Vampire Familiar's effect just because we want Retainer to go into the graveyard, although we do have another normal summon, so we could save the normal summon, and we could save this special summon from the graveyard and just summon it. And we need to have a we've got 2 traps in the field. It would be nice to get out our negate, because if our opponent plays something like Lightning Storm, we want to protect our other trap cards. So I do want to get Retainer's effect. So we are going to do Familiar's effect. We discard the Retainer, and then we summon back Familiar. Familiar won't get the search, but then I'm going to normal summon that Vampire Scarlet Scourge. Now you might be wondering, why did I tribute over Link Karibo and not to the level 1 monster? Well, there's 2 reasons why. We're going to use it later on as a zombie monster, and Link Karibo isn't a zombie monster, but also Vampire Takeover says that all the monsters on your field must be zombies. So yeah, either they must be all zombies or they must all be vampires, one of the 2. So having Link Karibo on the field will cuck you, because it's not a zombie monster unless you have like a zombie world on the field. I'm going to just double check that effect, and we will be able to read it in a second when I highlight over it. But yeah, it's either one of those 2 restrictions. So what we are going to do though is we are going to use our 2 zombie monsters, our little babies, and we are going to use them to make Vampire Sucker as well. We have a vampire in the graveyard, so it's nicely set up for Vampire Takeover to be live, and Sucker will get a draw, not now but later on, so that's always good. And we've got our 3 key trap cards, 2 summons, and 1 negate. And yeah, I mean, this is what vampires do. This is like their board. It isn't a crazy board. 1 negate, 1 no other interactions really, just summons to the field. We can summon Fraulein from the deck, so that is kind of an interaction, but it will get destroyed during the end phase. And yeah, so I chose this duel here because I thought it would be fitting, because this person was playing heroes, and kind of a send up to the GX duel where Vampire Camilla, what was so great about her being one of the Dark Signers, I don't know what it was called in the English dub, but in the Japanese dub they're called, no, Dark Signers, that's 5Ds. What were they called in GX? I can't remember what they were called. Oh my god, it's so long ago since I watched GX. And then but Vampire was one of like the 7 lords. You had like the Gravekeeper guy, you had Amniel, that was a sad duel. You had Tanya. Tanya was amazing. I love Amazoness Tanya. I love those duels, man. Everyone was just a character and they had a deck around them. They were really, really cool. And Vampire Camilla obviously was a zombie user, and she used vampires, but there weren't that many vampire cards. Her boss monster was Vampire Genesis, and that card, I don't even remember how to summon it, but I remember there was a structure deck for her, and that card was just like impossible to summon. So yeah, it wasn't really that good. But what was great about Vampire Camilla was that she was able to actually beat almost everyone in the cast. She beat who did she beat first? She beat oh, what was the teacher's name? What's the teacher's name in that show? How can I forget his name? Holy crap, Ancient Gear guy, the guy that does that. I'm gonna be kicking myself. July boy. I remember you used to say that shit a lot. Oh, I've gone blank. I can't remember his name. Crowler. Villian Crowler. Yeah, Crowler. Or Crowley or Crowler. Can't remember. One of the two. Anyway, she beat him. She beat his Ancient Gear Golem deck, which was kind of cool because Ancient Gear Golem was a beast. And then she beat Zane. And his Cyber Dragon deck. And obviously Zane was like heralded as like the prodigy child. I'm the one that's going to be gifted, and you know I'm the one that's going to be like the bit. He wasn't really smug, but he was really he was like considered to be the best duelist, and she beat him. But I think she cheated, if I remember. I think she like threatened his little brother, Sho Marufuji. Can't remember how it went, but she beat him. And then she finally faced against Yuki Judai, or Jaden Yuki, and he summoned out one of my favorite monsters, which was Elemental Hero Shining Flare Wingman. And when that card came out and he was glowing and it was like the evolved form of Flare Wingman, I was like, what? That card looks sick. I was like, oh, he looked awesome, man. Learning out about GX. I always liked Vampire Camilla. So the fact that there's a vampire deck is kind of cool. I wish they were more competitive though. It would be good if they got some more support. This deck isn't like terrible. Like the starters are good, but there's no real good removal because it's all trying to be like, oh, we'll steal your opponent's monsters instead. And that's not always easy to do. Not in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! But I bet this deck is a lot bit easier to play in like Duel Links or something like that probably. Anyway, into this duel here. My opponent hasn't summoned out Shining Flare Wingman, but he has got 2 copies of that guy whose name I totally remember. I don't remember what it does, but I do like this card. I do like that hero card because that hero card searches out Miracle Fusion, and that was one of the things that was always like a downside with Miracle Fusion, but that it wasn't easily searchable. So him being on the field, I think he's cool. He's not the Shining, no, he's Sunrise, Elemental Hero Sunrise, I think he's called. Yeah, so this is why I chose this duel, because I thought it was as close to the anime that we were actually going to get to, where Shining Flare Wingman actually beat Vampire Genesis. I think, if I remember the duel, she had this card which was like sucking cards into the door and summoning out vampires. I can't remember. Anyway, we were in a tight spot here, but what we're going to do is we negated his Elemental Hero Stratos because we didn't want him to pop our cards on the field, and I didn't want to use them right there and then. And so we've used Vampire Takeover to summon out Queen from the graveyard, and then also activate our Kingdom. And then from Vampire Awakening, we've summoned out Duke. And this was where I was like, crap. I didn't realize that Duke would miss the timing. And if you haven't heard about missing the timing before, I have spoken about it before on the channel, but allow me to do this again. There is a ruling in Yu-Gi-Oh! And if a card says when this card, and not if this card is vulnerable to miss the activation timing. What that means, or what happened in this situation, is Vampire Duke's effect has to activate when it's summoned. So the last thing that had to happen was Vampire Duke was summoned. But because I used it in response to one of my opponent's effects, or it wasn't the very last thing to happen on the field. It missed the activation timing and I wasn't able to activate his effect. And my plan was, when Duke is summoned, he can mill a card from my opponent's deck to the graveyard, and then Vampire Kingdom would have popped one of his Elemental Hero Sunrises. But that's not too bad, because it's actually going to work out in our favor now. Our opponent gets a little bit overzealous here. He decides that, you know what, he's going to get rid of my whole entire board, which sucks. And he's going to make Rainbow Neos. And Rainbow Neos is summoned by the effect of Predaplant Verte Anaconda, which sends a copy of Neos Fusion, Elemental Hero Neos, and Rainbow Dragon from his hand to the graveyard. And summons out that 4,500k beat stick. Now, what did happen though, because he sent a card to the graveyard, Vampire Kingdom triggered. And I would have been able to pop his monster. I did try to, but Neos Fusion has protection effect, so we weren't able to get rid of it that easily. We'll have to find another way. Maybe that card in the hand I have could help me. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, with Crackdown only in my hand, that would be, I can steal his monster, and he is getting rid of Predapont Verte Anaconda to trigger his effect. But I mean, the card that you take with Crackdown can't attack, so you need another extender. Although we do have a little doggy in that window over there who could maybe be summoned to the field. Let's summon that Vampire Retainer, and Vampire Retainer will hit the field, and we're going to get rid of Kingdom. Even though I hate getting rid of Kingdom, I do like the Kingdom to stay on the field. You need something to go to the graveyard for Retainer and Familiar to summon. So Retainer hits the field, Retainer will trigger, pay 500 life points, we will get a search out, and it's tricky. I'm going to go for Vampire Desire because we can send a card to the graveyard, or we could even summon back one from the graveyard if we want to, but not with this card because it will get banished. So Vampire Desire will fizzle out. That did happen to me once in a duel when I was practicing with this deck. So we're going to send a card to the graveyard, and I often always go for Bats or Dog, whichever I don't have, but you don't always have to. Remember, like I said, it will modify the level of your Vampire card. So if you want to go for like your rank 5 or your rank 6 play, and that having that level is important, or even if you just want to put a vampire in the graveyard like Vampire Grace, you can just mill her instead and then use her later on if you've got like some kind of extender that can bring it back. But we're going to go for the Bats. Because our card wouldn't go to the graveyard, I couldn't send the doggy. I had to send the card in my hand, which was Vampire Awakening, which is a shame. I would like to keep Awakening, but what we're going to do here now is use Bats to go and grab Vampire Red Baron. Now Red Baron's got a really cool effect, and so we're going to tribute over the dog Retainer. He's going to go, and we're going to summon Red Baron to the field. And now Red Baron looks really cool. Red Baron looks like a Dark Souls character. And I know that's like the thing to say. Everyone's like, hey, this like Dark Souls. But, and this probably came out before Dark Souls, probably. And there's been cards like this before, like Berserk came out way before Dark Souls. He looks really cool. He looks like a cool guy. I like this card, is what I want to say. And yeah, we took our opponent's Neos, Rainbow Neos, and we're going to do game for this because our cards are really weak and his card is really strong. So thank you for giving me the really powerful card. And this time Vampire Camilla beats Jade and Yuki. So guys, happy Halloween. Hope you've enjoyed this game. Like I said, it's not on a crazy deck. It's not an amazing deck. It is a funsy deck. But if you want to try and build it, a lot of people are actually building like Halloween style decks. I've seen quite a few people playing vampires. So if you want to try it, here's the build. Have fun and have a happy Halloween.